the reflections as you go home. Throughout the week, we'll give you the handout as we leave. But if you want to take notes for the lesson, there are some notebooks over here. If you want to grab one, and then pens over there behind Aurora. If you want to grab one, you can just sneak over, just grab one if you want to keep notes. No judgment. If you want us to close our eyes so we don't see you, that's fine. No, I'm kidding. But if you want to grab one, just go ahead and grab one now so that you can take notes for the lesson. If you want to wait, or if you have one at home and you know that you'll bring it next week and you want to do that, you can do that as well. We just have those available for you. We want you to engage with this. We want you to take notes. We want you to soak in what we are. Either one. The top one has more like the sections, and you can still use it for your devotionals. The other one's just a notebook if you want your own free space. So if you want to grab one later, you can do that as well. All right, guys, as I mentioned earlier, the whole church is going through this series called Soul Shaping, talking about taking care of your soul and making it healthy, making sure we pay attention to that. How do you invest in it? How do you keep it healthy and growing? And how is it a part of your faith? And thinking about this series and thinking about how we were to do it for middle school, one of the things that I realized as we talked, as we were thinking about soul, it's one of those things, and you maybe experience this, or you're probably even thinking about it now. Soul is one of those things. Your soul is one of those things that probably you are aware of, that you would like, oh yeah, everybody has a soul, sure. Something that we know is a part of our faith. But if we were to really ask you like what it is, or like what does it mean to take care of it, or to define it, probably wouldn't have a good definition, right? Like I even say that for myself, of like I don't even really know how to define it well for this series. So if we're to jump in and be like, you need to take care of your soul, you might be like, yeah, okay, that's a good idea, but really what does that mean? Yeah. And I'm not gonna put you on the spot. I thought about asking y'all like, how would you define soul? But that is kind of what we're gonna jump into today. Before we jump into the rest of the series, we're gonna be a little bit behind and off what the rest of the church is doing. But I want us to talk about like what is a soul, and that will be the first week, and that'll set up, and we'll dive into this a little bit more on Tuesday, and we'll dive more into like the taking care of it and like having a healthy soul, and like what does it mean with your faith. But really today, what I want us to explore and what I want us to like sink in is really talking about like what is a soul anyways. Because when we say that's a part of your faith, that's part of your relationship with God, really what does that mean? What does that mean about who you are and how you connect with Jesus and how you understand your faith, right? And so I want us to talk about that because I know it's hard to define and hard to grasp. And so as we dive into that, first let's just talk about what a soul is not. And this might be a little bit iffy. I know there's like lots of different definitions. I know sometimes like if you have those cartoons, like when a cartoon character will die and there's like that ghost that comes out and you're like, okay, yeah, that's a soul. It's our ghost thing, right? And like, it's not that either. It's not like about our ghosts leaving our bodies, which it's a weird phrase to say. It's not about our ghosts leaving our bodies. It's not about just us in like an invisible form or anything like that. It's really a complex, deep thing. And as we talk about what a soul is not, it's not just a replacement word for something that we already know and how to explain. I know as we've talked through with a lot of different people would kind of substitute words. They'll say like, your soul is your conscience. It's how you know what is right and wrong. But it's more than that. It's not necessarily just your conscience. It's not just your habits. It's not your preference, the thing that defines like what you do like or do not like. It's not your preferences. It's not your interests. It's not your morals. It's not what you know to believe, what you believe to be right or wrong. It's not even your beliefs. Your soul isn't just another word for like what you believe in. Your soul is something deeper. I thought about trying to put some of these quotes up there, but I did like a search, like what is a soul, or like research on the human soul. And there's all these different things there, and I was reading like all these medical journals and all this stuff, and I'm like, what am I reading? I just want to play games. And it was like, Dr. So-and-so did this study on the cognitive blah, 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 blah. I'm like, what? And I thought about throwing that up here just to show you like, oh, I'm smart, I know what this means. But basically, summarizing everything that everybody said and what they have researched on the soul, is there some people that there's some scientists who are like, yeah, soul doesn't exist. It's just another part of your mind that like creates the memories and your memories and your habits and all that, all the different things that we already know how to explain. But what other deeper research has shown that there is something that like, yeah, you have this part of your mind that explains like your conscience and like the right and wrongs and the memories, but there's even something deeper beyond our mind that like creates all of that. That drives that. There's something deeper that science doesn't really know how to explain. There's this underlying thing to who we are that drives all the other parts of us, all the other parts of like what we believe to be right is wrong, what creates our conscience. There's something like there's a foundation to our conscience, to our being, to how we live, to what we pursue, that comes from somewhere that we just can't really explain. There's this soul, there's this part of us that is our soul, that is something deeper and bigger than just our mind and just what we think and just what we feel. There's something that like drives that. And a lot of like researchers and psychologists and medical people agree on that. And so there's still that question of like, what is the soul? If it's not our conscience, if it's not our memories, if it's not just a corner of our brain that we have not tapped into, what is it? And I can't really give you like a definitive answer of like, this is your soul. Like, this is what it is. But if we kind of think of it, kind of like gravity, right? Like, we know that gravity exists. Yeah, anybody ever just tripped and fell? You're like, anybody had personal experience with gravity before? Anybody? Van, no. Van's like, no, not me. Gravity and I are not on good terms. Like, we know gravity exists, but if I were to ask you to define gravity, what is gravity? You'd probably be like, it's the pulling force of the earth. Like, what is the pulling force of the, like, we know gravity is there. There's probably some kind of scientific thing that we can explain, but we can't just say gravity is falling, right? Because, yeah, if we were to drop something, it would fall, but that's not what gravity is. Gravity isn't falling. That's just me being a klutz, right? Or me just dropping things. Or we can't just say gravity is like this pull to the earth, because like what's pulling you? And so kind of gravity, if we kind of think of it, like gravity is this thing that we know is there. It's this bigger force that keeps everything grounded to the earth, that affects and influences everything that we do. Like, we're able to run and jump and climb and build and sit and all the other things that we are able to do because of how gravity works. And we know that it influences all these different things. But it's one of those things that we don't really think about, and that, yeah, maybe we could explain it somewhere, but we know that it's this bigger thing. And our souls are kind of like that. It's the gravity that is a part of us that influences and drives and affects everything that we do in a certain way. And the things that we are able to do comes in part because of the souls that we have. And so we got to kind of think of it that way. So what is the soul? Well, as we dive deep into some of the verses, like the Bible talks about the soul in lots of different ways. There are stories of like prophets and like even I think Jesus healing people and saying like their souls came back to their body and they came back from the dead. There are verses that talk about our souls going to another place once we die. There are ways that the Bible talks about how the souls influence how we live. But there are two key verses that I think kind of describes what the soul is and what we should kind of expect from our souls. And the first one's in Genesis chapter 2. If you have your Bibles, Genesis chapter 2. The other one's going to be in Matthew 22, 22, if you want to go and turn there. But Genesis chapter 2. Genesis chapter 2. And this is in the story of creation, where God's creating the animals, the waters, the sea, mountains, water, all the things, and he creates people, right? And you probably have heard this verse before. But in Genesis chapter 2, he creates people. And then in verse 7, it says, the Lord God formed the man from the dust of the ground. So man is created. Man is there. It has all the parts that he needs. He has his lungs, it has his arms, all the brains, everything. Man is there. He created the man from the ground and then out of the ground and then breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. Now, I know you're probably like, Chris, this doesn't mention the soul. But if you were to look at like some of the Hebrew, and then the man became a living being. Sorry, finish the verse. Breathed the breath of life and then the man became a living being. But if you look at the word life there in like the Hebrew and like in what the text says, life is the same thing as soul. They use that word back and forth. They say like God breathed the breath, the soul of life into the man. And it's not just like he gave like the man CPR and like the man started breathing all of a sudden. It's like God gave him something different and specific and special to his being that he didn't already have. And so when we look at what a soul is, we see like within this verse especially that it's God-given, that God giving the man something different. He doesn't give it to the animals. He doesn't give it to the plants. He doesn't give it to the waters or anything. He gives the man the soul of life, God-given. It is separate from the body because you see that he created the body and then gave him something separate from what the man already had. And that is life-giving, that it's this driving force, that it made this man a living being. And again, the word with being there, it's interchangeable with the word soul as well. Like it's this living creature, it's this living soul. It has this life that is, again, different than what the animals and the plants had because God gave them something different and something specific. It is something we see, it's this separate part of who we are that's different than our minds, than our lungs, than our blood, than our arms, than our feet. And it's something different that the rest of the world doesn't have because God gave it to the man especially. And I say man collectively, gave it to humans collectively. And then we get into this other verse where we see in Matthew 22, where we see like Jesus references this, and where we get the other part that it's very influential to how he lived and to how he died. And Jesus is teaching, and there's this teacher of the law, there's this man who comes up to Jesus and says, what's important? What's important to my faith? What's important to like, what's the greatest commandment? And Jesus answers in 22 verse 37. Jesus said, what's important, the greatest commandment is to love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the first and the greatest commandment. So again, we see this separate thing where Jesus is saying, this is something separate from you that you need to pay attention to. This is something specific to what drives you and to what motivates you that is very influential to how you live and therefore also to how you die, that drives you. And that's where we see that our souls are this deep, living, driving force of our being. That's not just our minds, it's not just our conscience. It's something deeper within us that drives who we are. And so why does this matter? And I'm going to show you the circle. I'm going to try to explain it. I know it's going to look very complicated. It's just mainly because I like all the colors. But why does this matter? And we're going to dive deeper into this throughout the next couple weeks. But when we recognize, kind of like as we see in Matthew 22, that our soul is a bigger part of who we are, it's trying to align us with the bigger picture of who God is. Our souls are this bigger picture of who we are that's aligning us with the bigger picture of who God is. And you'll see, I'll explain all the other parts of the circle, but you'll see right there in the middle, when everything lines up, it gives us this deep relationship and this connection with God, when everything lines up. But when we look at the parts of the verses of loving God with all your heart, with all of your soul, and with your mind, and we see how it relates to God with our hearts and how we feel and how we connect and how we relate to God, what we are motivated by, what we are driven by within our souls and ourselves, our minds, what we think and what we do and how we act on all the things that are a part of us. When we have all three of those and it all aligns and we have this deep relationship connection. And why this matters, and really quickly, because there are a lot of times where we could respond in different ways. Where if we just focus on making sure our God and our souls are connected, then that gives us a connection and no relationship. And I'll go that a little bit deeper. Or if we just make sure our minds and our souls are aligned up together, then we have this relationship but no connection with God. Or if we make sure that our self and God are lined up, then we have this connection and no relationship. Now, what do I mean by all that? If we were to look at the example, how many of you asked for a new phone for Christmas? If I asked for a new phone? Or Elijah, you asked for a new phone? Okay, so really this one will kind of, and you got it? You got the new phone. You got the new phone. Okay, I know often throughout Christmas, but I know this happens all the time. Like we ask for this new, when we're ready for a new phone, or maybe our phone is broken and we're like, okay, I really want a new phone, or the new phone came out and I want that, right? So imagine you come to Christmas and you open it, and I don't have a new phone, but we'll use mine as an example. You open the box and you have the new phone. You got the new phone for Christmas. But when we look at these different scenarios, this is kind of like what could happen. So if we just focus on God and our motivation, making sure our heart is lined up and our soul are lined up, It's like we have this connection and relationship that is basically like getting a phone, but you can't use it. Like it has no power, it has no Wi-Fi, it has no apps, has nothing. Like you can't turn it on. You're like, yeah, I got a new phone. Look at it. And that's all you can do. And you have this phone and you're just like, isn't this awesome? They're like, what does it do? And you're like, I don't know. And like, what apps do you have on it? None. Do you use the internet? No. Do you make calls? What is that? Like all these things, you have this new phone, this great piece of technology or whatever, and you're like, this is all I can do. And I can't even turn it on. I don't even know what it looks like when it turns on. That's kind of basically when we make sure our hearts and our souls are lined up, when we focus on just God and our soul, it's like you have this phone, you have this powerful thing, but you have like no relationship with it. You have no interaction with it because you're keeping yourself out of it. Or if you look at the bottom where you're like, okay, I know that I need to take care of my soul, that I want to make good choices, I want to do good things, but you know, I can do that differently without God. I don't need God to be a part of it. I don't need God to define it. That is like when you get a new phone that you can use it. You can use all the internet apps, whatever, but it has no power, no battery. And you're like, yay, I can pretend to like make calls, whatever, and you can interact with it, but you can't turn it on because you have no like source to it. And so you're connected to your soul. You're like, yes, I have this driving thing. I have this tool that I can use, but I have nothing to power that tool. I have nothing to shape it. I have nothing to define it. I have nothing that can like use it and to make it useful to me. I just have this thing that I know that I can use, but I don't know how to use it because I have no power. Right? Or if you're like, and this is where a lot of us fall into. This is probably where a lot of us fall into this category, where we focus on ourselves and we focus on our relationship with God. Because I would say a lot of us, we have knowledge of God. We know the right things that we should do. We know like what God is asking us to do. And yeah, I could give you the church answers if you were to ask me the things, but I have no motivation to do it. I have no desire to do it. I have no desire to read my Bible. I have no desire to worship. I have no desire to grow in my faith. Yeah, I know what God is. I will go to church. I will go through the motions, but there's nothing driving it. And that is basically having a phone, getting it for Christmas, and you can't even take it out of the box. Has no power, has no use, has nothing. You're just like, yay, I have a box, and like, what can I do with it? I can't interact with it. I can't use it. I can't turn it on. There's nothing there, but I can tell you what the phone does. I know what the phone does because I've researched it. My friends have told me about it. I've seen the commercials. I've read the instruction manual, but I can't do anything with it. And that is often how we treat God when we leave our souls out of it. That we don't care about that deeper part of ourselves, that we don't care about our motivation. We're just like, yeah, I know the answers that you want me to give you. I will tell you that, yeah, God is the one who loves me, but will I love God back? Nah, I have no reason to. But when all three of those align, when we focus on our soul, when we focus on our hearts and how we feel about God, when we think about and we focus on our minds and how we live out and act out and utilize what we know about God, and all three of those align, that is like when we get the phone, we can use it and we download the apps and we take the pictures and we share, and we can share all the great things that our phone does. We have this relationship with it, we have this connection with it, we have this usefulness, this motivation, this growth, and this awareness, and this knowledge, and this life-changing aspect to how it exists in our lives. Does all that make sense? I know that was a lot. We'll dive deeper into it. But you gotta look into it that way. That the reason why we gotta focus on God and focus on our souls is so that we can have that connection and that interaction, that relationship with God. And so that takes us to the takeaway. Again, we'll dive deeper into that throughout the next few weeks. But what I would encourage you to do, especially this week, as you think about the concept and this part of yourself that is your soul, pay attention to the deeper part of your being and be aware of how the alignment of your soul influences how you live. That what's your motivation? How do you line that up with what God wants for you? What is your driving force? What is your connection to God? What is your relationship with Him? And how are the deeper parts of yourself growing you in that relationship with Him? How does your soul take you deeper into what God wants for you in the bigger picture, the bigger purpose of who He is and what He means for your life? So pay attention to that. Pay attention to that this week as we get ready to dive deeper into that. As I said, as we leave, we'll take these cards. Again, it'll recap all the things that we talked about in the circles, has some reflection questions and some solo times for you to do throughout the week, and a memory verse for you to do. Dive deep into that, do that. Answer those questions, journal, pray. Join us on Tuesday because we'll explore this a little bit more and be able to interact with that a little bit more on Tuesday night. And just get ready to know like what exists below the surface for us as we dive deeper into what our souls are. Let's pray. Dear Father, we pray saying thank you, God, that you didn't just create us as something equal as the plants and the other animals, or as equal to everything else that is created in the world, but Lord, you gave us something deeper and separate and deeper that drives us to you, that gives us some motivation to pursue you, that shapes who we are, that it defines our connection to you. God, help us just to pay attention to that. Help us to see what it means to have a soul and why you gave that to us and why we shape that to grow more in love with you. Lord, help us just to see the depths of who we are and how you enter into those depths to bring us closer to you and to have that relationship. Be with us as we continue to be safe and continue to help the Lord. Be with us in all that we do, Lord. All right, guys, go see Anna to get these cards. We also have rings for you if you want to.